So, with The Well, we have the third episode of Doctor Who's 15th season, or second season, I don't know, who's counting. And I'm really interested in the next 4 weeks of Doctor Who, starting with The Well, because from The Well to Lucky Day to the story in the engine and the Interstellar Song Contest, we, for the first time in a long time, have a run of episodes that are not created by a showrunner. This is a story that has been co-written from Russell T Davies and Mancunian writer Sharma Angel Warfall, who has written in many writers' rooms, worked on shows like Dreamland as well, and has worked for Netflix and the BBC and Disney. So Sharma Angel Warfall, I'm presuming what's happened with this story is that she pitched a base under siege horror story with these elements from stories like Event Horizon, from films like Event Horizon, maybe even some allusions to like Doctor Who's past, like the Satan Pit and Turn Left and such. And then Russell was like, oh, these elements seem a bit familiar. Let's turn this into a sequel to Midnight. And then that's exactly what happened. And then that's presumably why Russell has got the co-writing credit. However, The Well, the first non-Russell T Davies solely penned story since Rogue, which is already like cause for celebration. I loved this one, folks. I thought this was really, really good. This is probably Doctor Who's best episode, certainly its scariest episode since Wild Blue Yonder. And The Well, interestingly, has a lot on its mind, which is a lot more than can be said for the previous season of Doctor Who. Firstly, there is, of course, the conflict between the Doctor and Belinda, Belinda being the reluctant companion who wants to try and get home to see her parents. When it comes to this being an attention-grabbing sequel to Midnight, the 2008 story written by Russell T Davies, which, honestly, is probably one of the best episodes of the entire show's history. Not just revival, it's like one of the best in the entire show's history. It's absolutely stellar, and I watched it after this episode broadcast, The Well, and it completely holds up, folks. It's absolutely superb. And the Midnight is essentially, I'm not saying that The Well is as good as Midnight, it isn't. If Midnight is like a 10 out of 10 story, then The Well is like an 8 or maybe a 9 tops, but Midnight is so uniquely special, and Midnight is also an episode that, if the rumor is true, Russell wrote in just a couple of days because there was like another writer who had to drop out, or there was a big complication behind the scenes, meaning they needed to rewrite an episode or start from scratch on something. With Midnight, the story is the Doctor is on this shuttle bus on the way to like this tour on the diamond planet of Midnight, and some entity goes inside of the bus and starts harassing and copying and intimidating the people inside. Just these ordinary humans who end up turning on each other. And it's filled with these incredible, brilliant little character beats and character moments. And everybody in that show, everyone in that episode is a fully fleshed out person from basically moment one, and have their own reactions and interactions with each other when this creature starts copying them. The Well is not like that. The Well is essentially a base under siege story where it's a group of people, a group of soldiers, akin to James Cameron's Aliens, making their way into a base where there's only one survivor. We've got Alice, played by Rose Ayling-Ellis, who was absolutely brilliant in this episode. And Alice is the last survivor, having killed her best friend. She's also deaf, speaks with British Sign Language as well, which the Doctor also knows. I thought it was a really nice touch that the Doctor has gotten over that really out-of-character moment in Under the Lake and Before the Flood, where the 12th Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi, did not speak sign language. He claimed to, and then instantly buckled, which, a funny gag, but the Doctor speaks like 10 billion languages, but one of them isn't British Sign Language. I don't know, that seemed a little bit out of character, but funny joke. The Doctor now does speak British Sign Language and is able to communicate with Alice, and Alice is the absolute beating heart of this episode. And Rose Ayling-Ellis, who viewers will know was the actress who I was campaigning for to be the Doctor's next companion prior to the casting of Millie Gibson. I thought that after her stint in soap operas and TV dramas, and also Strictly Come Dancing, not that that's a prerequisite to be in Doctor Who, I thought that she would be the next companion after Russell T Davies and Bad Wolf took over the show. But nope, she's got a supporting role, a major supporting role in The Well, and she's absolutely brilliant in this story. She's the beating heart of it. And what's very interesting about this being a sequel to Midnight, and I will guarantee you folks, I will bet actual cash money that this did not start out as a sequel to Midnight, but was rather appropriated and readapted from the original drafts when Russell got a hold of it to make it into a sequel. And I don't think that Midnight needed a sequel. I think that the ambiguity, the story in and of itself does stand up on its own. But if you were to do a sequel to Midnight, this probably is the best you're going to get because it's so drastically different in approach. Whereas with Midnight, you have this group of people who are just ordinary citizens on this bus. You've got the hostess, you've got the family, you've got the scientific people on this expedition. You've also got the driver and the mechanic in the front as well, who are quickly killed. When it comes to The Well, the cast of characters is a little bit too big, but it doesn't stay that way for long. They are deliberately kind of dehumanized. They're given numbers, they're not given names for the most part. Culin Dunn plays the head of this task force called Shire, who is really, really good in this episode. When it comes to the supporting cast, it's mainly her and Cassio, played by Christopher Chung, and Mo, played by Bethany Antonia. They are the main ones to focus on in this story. The rest of them are basically relegated to numbers and become the centerpiece in a surprisingly brutal set piece where multiple members of the group get offed, which is very fun. I think The Well is accidentally genius, because if you were going to try and do a sequel to Midnight, you do want to try and repeat and build upon the themes of insecurity, of, this entity hijacking somebody and then using the people's insecurity to turn on each other, and to literalize those betrayals, to literalize turning your back on somebody in a sequel is surprisingly brilliant and clever metatextual analysis. When it comes to The Well, the most important scene of the episode is the one when a bunch of people have died, the Midnight entity has been revealed and it's killed a bunch of the soldiers, and they're trying to figure out what on earth are they going to do next, and they essentially decide they're going to abandon Alice, and then they turn their back on Alice. And this has multiple meanings as well. They're turning her back on her, they're going to leave without her, they're going to abandon her to her fate. That's one meaning of it. But the other meaning of it as well is that because Alice is deaf and speaks with British Sign Language predominantly, it means that when you have your back to a deaf person, they can't hear you and they can't read your lips. They are shut out of the conversation, they're shut out of the debate. So when the Doctor and others literally turn their back on her, it means that they're shutting her out of the conversation on multiple fronts. And also the fact that she is deaf, that she is marginalised. It alluded to being a single mum. She's definitely a mother. She's got a 2-year-old daughter, but there's no partner or anything mentioned or alluded to at all, as far as I can remember at least. So it's implied that she's also a single mother, who is basically a marginalised group, especially in the UK. If you're a single mother, the punditry fucking hates you. So there's those multiple elements as well to it. So taking the Midnight entity from the original story and using the repetition, stealing people's voices to turn this group of normal people against each other, and then literalizing that in Midnight by having them turn their back on a marginalized person, is a fantastic extension of the subtext. It's accidentally genius, and it goes even further. I've talked about this on stream before, but if you go into the shooting script of Midnight, it's one of the best stage directions that Russ T Davies has ever done. When Skye has possessed the Doctor, and the Doctor is now repeating her, is now speaking after her, there's a great stage direction in Midnight at the bottom of page 47, when the Professor leads Skye away from the Doctor. He leads her away from the Doctor. The Doctor, with no strength, still on his knees, now has his back to everyone, so they can't see the panic on his face, and it's easier to blame him when they don't have to look at him. And the fact that that stage direction, which is not explicit text in the episode Midnight itself, is literalized in The Well, nearly 20 years later, through them turning their back on a disabled person to shut her out of the conversation and presumably to make it an easier moral decision for them when they don't have to look at her. Fucking cinema, man. It's inspired. It's brilliant as well when you have the additional element of the Midnight Entity, the creature, being stuck to Alice's back, where it's very similar. This story basically draws a lot of cues with Doctor Who's past. Not only in, like, the superficial sense of, like, the reluctant companion with characters like Ian and Barbara and Tegan from the classic series, but also in elements of the show's more recent past with things like the Satan Pit, where you've got this well where a devil, a demon came out, and also Turn Left as well, as the chat has alluded to, where there's something on their back that is sort of like being seen in the corner of people's eye. It was a really great inspired directorial choice from, presumably from either Russell or from co-writer Sharma or from the director Amanda Brocci, to depict the POV of Belinda seeing the creature behind Alice twice, and then when the other soldier sees the creature, we don't see it. We're seeing it through Belinda's POV, but through the actor's performance and everybody's reaction, we know he's seen it. I think that was a really inspired directorial choice. So yeah, I think that was really great. And then Turn Left has got the creature on Donna's back as well. So yeah, so all of these allusions to the show's past as well. Despite my massive reservations around Empire of Death and The Legend of Ruby Sunday, there is a very interesting line in The Legend of Ruby Sunday when the 15th Doctor is talking to Kate, when they're talking about him being a grandfather before he can become a father, which is a very strange retcon, but whatever. But the line when Kate is talking about the Brigadier telling stories about the Doctor to Kate when she was a young girl, and the Doctor's like, I was a different man back then. I was an enigma. I'm trying to escape those days, but they're still there. And I think the well is almost like a crystallization of that. I think Darren Mooney has put it incredibly well in his write-up of the show, in his write-up of the episode on the movie blog, where the well, because they could have just called it the pit or the hole or whatever, but they specifically call it a well. And there is a saying in culture of, like, going back to these things, going back to the well, tapping that well again, of nostalgia, of a show that's trying to have a fresh start, a show that's trying to reboot itself, trying to have a relatively clean slate, but still finding itself compelled to go back to the well of nostalgia, go back to the well of these themes, of these characters, of this iconography. Doctor Who is over 60 years old now, and this current iteration of it is approaching 2 years now, if you include the 60th anniversary specials under Bad Wolf. But it still is attached to the show's past. And I think that's really fascinating. I don't know if it's, like, gonna manifest in any other ways moving forward. I don't know if this is just a one-off reference to it, or if it's something that the show is going to try and textually wrangle with over the next 5 weeks. Either way, I think it's still very interesting. I think it's much more intentional here than it is in episodes like Joy to the World, where it's the second Christmas special where the Doctor is mourning the loss of a young blonde companion from London whose name begins with R and is colour-coded, and then all of a sudden meets a companion surrogate, and the episode ends with that companion surrogate telling them that they need to find somebody. You know, it's basically just Runaway Bride again, but shit. But when it comes to the well, it seems a lot more deliberate. Oh, sorry, Yaz has brought me brownie. Thank you, Yasmin. Love you. She's brought me brownie. Thank you, Yaz. She's the fucking best. Side note, I've been watching this season so far with Yaz. She has not watched Empire of Death, which, as far as I'm concerned, she's dodged a fucking bullet there. But for the rest of the series, I think she's been enjoying it quite a lot. But I think that she says she didn't like the well that much, but she was watching half of the episode. It felt like half the episode through her fingers. So it was the jump scares, it was the freaky atmosphere. That was definitely working. That was bloody behind the sofa stuff. Did the rebel soldiers deserve to die? No, Cassio probably did. But that was absolutely savage from Shire. It's very, very clever. Early on in the episode, they established that because they're talking to a deaf character who communicates through British Sign Language as well, they have these subtitle projectors on them. And I was kind of waiting for the moment where the subtitles would go rogue, or something else would happen where the subtitles would turn on them. Like maybe the Midnight Entity finds a way to, like, corrupt the technology and start saying things to Alice that they're not actually saying. So Alice turns on them. I was kind of waiting for that. That didn't happen, but there was sort of like that undercurrent of like tension throughout it, for me at least. But they have these subtitle projectors on their suits, and there's a really great line early on when Belinda, who's a nurse but doesn't speak sign language, and Alice is like, a nurse who doesn't speak sign language, that's illegal. And it's one of those really nice little world building details where, like, you know, yeah, it provokes a conversation. It probably should be like mandatory, or at least maybe a certain percentage of NHS staff should be required to be able to speak sign language. There's a very good bit early on when, because they're trying to communicate with Alice, but Alice is looking at so many people. She's surrounded by so many characters. But Shia wants to get her attention. So she projects her subtitles to another person so that she's able to hear, essentially, what Shia is saying, even though Alice is not looking at Shia. And for Shia to abuse that later on to kill Cassio by projecting turn 180 to his subtitles so Alice turns around and kills him. Oh, that was brilliant. I have the same critique of this episode that about 90% of Doctor Who Twitter appears to have, and that's the bombastic massacre sequence. Conceptually, it's great that they lose control of the situation, and because of how they are poorly coordinated around the room, and because Alice is frightened and moving and turning around, essentially loads of them are dying and they're being flung around the room. I think it would have been significantly better if they just, like, snapped and dropped dead. I understand that you don't want to depict, like, everyone having their bones broken or their neck snapped or whatever on TV. Completely get that. There is a line that Doctor Who probably shouldn't be able to cross. But I do think that having them flung around everywhere made it a little bit too bombastic and a little bit unintentionally comedic. Conceptually, though, it's a brilliant set piece. Like, and with the Murray Gold Midnight music playing, this bombastic music that's normally played over an argument in the original one, but is instead played over an action set piece here. I think that's really clever. Dummy G fan, it's a family show, if we're going to say, oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that I want piles of goop and broken snapping bones. I don't want that. I do think there's a middle ground, though, behind the flinging and flying around and the having someone's skin turned inside out. The revelation that it is the planet Midnight, that could have maybe been handled a bit more organically, because the Doctor seems to figure it out, or at least remember that he's been on this world before by analysing the footage, and there's that miner who's like, we don't know what it is, and the Doctor's like, oh, when was the last time I didn't know what it was? And then it turns out they're on the planet of the Pting or something. I don't know. That seemed a little bit forced. But the rest of the scene as well, like carbon 35, what they call it, and also planet 6767, which is designated Midnight, and this is 400,000 years in the future. That bit was great. And for some reason, folks in the chat early on were saying that they hated the flashback to David Tennant. You folks know what Midnight is. You folks are subscribed and super chatting to a Doctor Who live stream channel. The average, quote, average viewer might need the slight reminder. I thought that was absolutely fine. And I've seen these edits on social media of people doing the same thing to, like, other stories, like Cold War with the Ice Warrior, having, like, half a second of Patrick Troughton and then half a second of Black and White Ice Warrior. It surprisingly works. There's the great scene when the 15th Doctor essentially confronts the creature as well. It's like, you've waited 400,000 years, what are you? I saw something years ago, lifetimes ago, with no shape, I had no face, I had no identity, I'd never been so scared in my life. The Doctor's looking over Alice's shoulder, and you can see a shadow appear on Alice's shoulder, on Alice's back, during the conversation. Like, you can see... Oh, actually, let me get rid of the webcam 2 secs. Yeah, you can see that Alice's shoulder is relatively white because of the shirt, but you scroll back a little bit, and there's a shadow on it. A shadow enters and leaves the scene as the 15th Doctor is talking to her. I thought that was really great. With the performance as well, the really long and broken take of him essentially flashing back to one of the most traumatic adventures of his life. I thought that was really, really effective and really powerful. And him having those tears in his eyes would have been so much more effective there if he hadn't been crying at basically every single episode beforehand, but that's a topic for another time. I don't think the Doctor will want to rewatch Midnight on a Tablet. Yeah, what would have been really, really bad and very Empire of Death coded is if the Doctor, after that revelation of the planet Midnight, goes to Cassio and Shire with this monitor where the well is, and is like, oh, 1 second, before we go back to Alice and Belinda, let's quickly watch a few clips from the 2008 episode Midnight on this monitor. That would have been very Empire of Death coded. Do a Tales from the TARDIS adaptation of Midnight. Compress it down to 20 minutes. The Doctor Who going back to its past in these ways, I think, is very fascinating. It's certainly more interesting than something like Empire of Death. Thank you to Gabrielle Andreal for subscribing during the livestream. I was going to say the third act was the weakest act. It might have been, but it was still really good because it still has the "Don't turn your back on me, all is lost" moment. It still has the scene of the Doctor looking over Alice's shoulder. It still has the really great revelation of the mercury in the pipe, and the Midnight Entity was the one who smashed up the mirrors early on, and then Belinda presumably getting possessed or having the entity on her back. I think that the third act is actually really, really strong. But also, this little detail as well, because they establish when they arrive that the airlock can only hold 6 people. So firstly, they get Alice out and a few of the other soldiers. There's 3 of them in this pod. It shuts, and then it's shown that there's actually 4 people in the pod in a very deliberate cutaway. The implication, I'm guessing, is that either the entity has split. Maybe it split when it reflected back at itself with the mercury when Alice got blasted forward. Or maybe there's more than one creature. Thankfully, while this episode does expand a little bit on the Midnight Entity, it doesn't actually remove that much of the mystery. We never really get a good look at it, which is absolutely for the best. But one thing that I've actually seen online that I kind of disagree with, and I don't mean this to be, oh, Mr. TARDIS has got big Doctor Who brain. I mean, I certainly do, but not necessarily compared to other people who've watched the episode. People are saying that they don't really like the idea that the Midnight Entity is playing games and that, it's toying with them. They think that that's significantly less scary than the entity in Midnight, like, being a brand new life form that's learning. I don't want to say that that's like a bad interpretation. I also think that the idea of a creature going on instinct and learning and being a brand new life form can also be equally, if not more, scary than one that is malicious and toying with its prey and playing with its food, basically. However, my interpretation of Midnight was always that the Midnight Entity is toying with these people. That's always been my interpretation of Midnight. I don't know if that's just me being big brain or whatever, but that has always been my interpretation of Midnight. One of the most important cutaways of the episode, for me at least, when the Doctor is at the back of the bus with the passengers and uses the name John Smith, which is a stupid placeholder name, but then we have this when somebody asks the Doctor, then tell us, your real name, and then this cut happens.
Perhaps you could tell us your name. What does it matter? Then tell us.
It cuts to the creature asking the question. And then, I don't think it's a coincidence that about a minute later, it latches onto him and starts copying just him.
She's not doing me.
That, yes, the creature is learning, but it is picking a target and consciously playing with him. And then, towards the end, when it starts basically manipulating these people by forcing him to repeat these intimidating threats.
Diamonds.
And the diamonds.
Until you came.
Until you came.
Body so...
She's playing with her food here. The creature's playing with her food. Like I said, I'm not trying to discredit people who don't like this interpretation, but for me, that's always been my interpretation of Midnight. And yes, Leslie Sharp, who plays Skye in the episode, absolutely brilliant. It is one of the best guest performances of the series. 100%. That creepy grin. Yeah. maybe it doesn't start out that way, but it definitely develops into that towards the end. I mean, come on, like look at her. Look at her like gloating in the spotlight.
Listen.
Just listen.
Just listen.
That's him.
Like she's reveling in this, and then when she starts repeating the Doctor's words back at them, it is that sadism that gives her away.
You can do it. You can do it. Molto bene.
Look, molto bene.
Allons-y.
Yeah, she's enjoying this. She's enjoying this. Also, that just reminded me that Alonzi, there's a really great Big Finish Master story with Sacha Dhawan's Master, where he essentially disguises himself as a Hercule Poirot style detective with a really bad French accent, and instead of saying Allons-y, he just says Allons. Like, it's really funny. It's had 400,000 years of learning. It has. If it is indeed the same creature, it can't confirm. I think it is the same creature because it was in the Doctor's head. It possessed him, so it would make sense that it knows his name. I think it's like a sadistic child who's playing with that. Yeah, and the idea that maybe it's grown stronger in the 400,000 years, but the idea that it could have flung those people around and broken their necks and broken every bone in their body, but decided to play with them instead for a bit and get them and manipulate them into throwing the Doctor out of the airlock. Yeah, that's a bit more sadistic. Which Doctor would deal with this creature the worst? That's a really good point. I actually do think that David Tennant, the 10th Doctor, was the worst one to deal with it. What I love about Midnight, and unfortunately something that the Well really can't repeat, it's that because Midnight is such a late in the game story for the 10th Doctor, it's able to take the 10th Doctor's strengths and flaws as a character and bring them to the forefront. Because it's one reason why I think regeneration stories should subvert the Doctor that's regenerating. It's why Caves of Androzani is like peak Doctor Who, because it takes this really insecure and like relatively like pacifist Doctor and essentially puts him in a Vietnam conflict of like drug running, which is like so un-Fifth Doctor like. And for Midnight as well, the 10th Doctor is like such an egotist. He's like such a confident, well-spoken, often like patronizing figure. And then all of that gets weaponized against him in Midnight. You can't have Midnight be a Series 2 story, or maybe even a Series 3 story. It's so well situated towards the end of his 3rd season. So it's able to like take those otherwise like strengths to the character and twist them and turn them against him. He's with the wrong people in the wrong place with the wrong skill set. I think the 10th Doctor is the worst one. I know the 5th Doctor is not a pacifist in actuality, but I think he likes to try and claim to be. He's the Doctor who, you know, after the sea base is left in ruins at the end of Warriors of the Deep, he's like, there should have been another way. And then in the Caves of Androzani, he basically dies trying to find that other way. Also, Doctor doesn't have a companion around. Yeah, that's another thing about Midnight as well. If he was with Donna, he'd have somebody in his corner backing him up, or maybe even reining him in. But with Midnight, it's just like unfiltered 10th Doctor, and that's weaponized against him.
Wonderful chap. All of them.
First Doctor would be best because he'd just throw Sky out. True! He'd be like, stop repeating after me. You get a jolly good smacked bottom. And then, like, open the door, smash, and then smack her out of the ship. It depends how early in the First Doctor's life. If it's like with, like, Ian, Barbara, and Susan, yeah, Sky's getting thrown out immediately. If it's with, like, Ben and Polly, probably not. The Chad First Doctor versus the Virgin 10th Doctor. So true. That actually sounds like a really good idea. That you've got these like fan edits online of like the Heaven Sent speech with different doctors. Like Heaven Sent with the War Doctor, Heaven Sent with the 10th Doctor, Heaven Sent with the 4th Doctor, etc. We need Midnight with the First Doctor, okay? The First Doctor is like testing the repetition and it's like shamble, bubble, dibble, dooble. Bang! Susan, Ian, Barbara, Ben, Polly, Vicky, Stephen, Dodo, Katerina. You know, yeah, doing that would be fun. What have you done with my shit? Seven talks it into killing itself. True. If Midnight is the first Doctor, it would fluff its lines as much as Hartnell. That would be so funny. If you were to somehow try and do a faithful adaptation of Midnight with the first Doctor, but you try and include the flubs, but the Midnight entity actually sticks to script. The Midnight entity, the actor playing Sky in the 60s, keeps to the script, but Hartnell flubs the lines. Chat, we're getting Stephen Noonan on the phone. We're making this happen. Yeah, so the implication at the end is that there's either more than one creature, or it's somehow like split apart and it's able to like toy with them to that extent. Because that's such a deliberate cutaway to show four people on the screen. Could the Midnight entity be related to the Not Things from Wild Blue Yonder? It could be, but it's not something it's not a theory I'm really ascribing to. I have seen some theories as well that Alice has been dead the whole time and that the Midnight entity is possessing her. People have like presented some evidence to it, and I think logistically in a plot capacity it could make sense. It's a valid interpretation. It's just something that I reject because I think that the theme of the episode is about not turning your back on, in this case, a marginalized person, a disabled single mother. And I think it would end up feeding into the conspiracy theory of like disabled people being untrustworthy or being like, worthy of justified in abandoning them. Obviously, you can tell a complicated story about that, about the infantilization of disabled people. You can tell a story. It's not like cinema or whatever, but there's a really great episode of The In-Betweeners where there's this theatre kid who's in a wheelchair, and he's the absolute biggest piece of shit character ever, who treats Will really, really badly. But Will can't really say much against him because he's a disabled kid. So any insult he does is weaponized against Will, which I think is a really funny comedic premise. There's a story to be told about that, but I think for this one, which is so it seems to explicitly wear on its chest its themes, that it's not necessarily what the story is about, it's how it's about it. So I think a story where Alice is actually complicit in what's happening, a story where Alice is manipulating them or is being possessed by this entity, it's an episode with negative implications that contradict the themes of the episode. So that's not a headcanon that I aspire to. But my god, chat, that scene when they do start to turn their back on her, and the way Rose plays it, it's like she says, "Don't turn your back on me." When I was rewatching it, I nearly cried. Because watching the episode for the first time, I'm in Doctor Who fan mode, and then in second viewing, I'm in analytic, what's this episode about mode. And when I kind of honed in on that, it really hit me like a train. It was really effective. It's such a strong performance. Rose is really great. Really great guest actors in this season so far. Really strong stuff. Do you consider The Well a worthy sequel to Midnight? Complicated question. It being a sequel to Midnight is probably the weakest part about it from a storytelling perspective. It's a fascinating sequel where it's able to build upon those subtextual moments, as pointed out in the script. It's easier to blame the Doctor when they don't have to look at him, and making that subtext, that literal stage direction, the literal text of the story as a metaphor for disability. Oh yeah, this is the bit that I wanted to talk about as well. The idea that if you kill Alice, then the entity jumps onto you, which I think is basically a science fiction literalization of the first they came for blank poem, basically. And I think it's really fascinating that The Well is releasing around the same time we have that Supreme Court judgment in the UK about gender identity and biological sex and such. The idea that the same people who are campaigning against trans people, the very moment they get what they want, they're immediately going to move to another marginalized group to target. They're going to immediately move to gay people. They're going to immediately move to black people, etc., etc. This is a tale as old as time. First they came for the socialists, then I didn't say anything because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for the disabled, then I didn't say anything because I'm disabled. You know the poem. And the idea of if you don't turn your back on these marginalized people, on these outcasts from society. Yeah, J.K. Rowling's already gone after ace people, but also there's that campaigner who I forget her name. She's this young blonde lady, who, as soon as the Supreme Court ruling was done, she was photographed with signs saying immigrants are the biggest threat to women. Without missing a single beat, they immediately moved from trans people to immigrants without even like a pause in between. Very similar to what's happening in the text of this episode, where if you try and turn your back on this one person, it immediately jumps to the next one. The target doesn't stop. It's a cyclical cycle of discrimination, of victimization. Yeah, one thing that's quite disappointing is that Sharma Angel Warfall doesn't appear to have any video interview footage in Unleashed or in this behind the scenes video, as far as I can tell, which is a bit disappointing. I understand that maybe Sharma might not always be at Bad Wolf Studios, but that's not stopped Doctor Unleashed from doing Bad Wolf Studio interviews before. And of course, if you're Russell and you know that one of the biggest criticisms of you is that you are, basically monopolizing Doctor Who creatively, wouldn't you think it would be great to have behind-the-scenes interviews with the co-writer of the episode? And also, Unleashed keeps on calling it Russell's script when it's a co-writer. I think that's a bit disappointing. Like, obviously, if Sharma doesn't want to do interviews, that's absolutely fine. But I think it's a bit disappointing that Unleashed doesn't really put her on a pedestal. Because I, honestly, with the characterization of the episodes, with Shire's characterization, and Alice as well, and Cassio, it feels like a different influence. Someone's positively influencing Russell. If at least Pete Matigue is sole writer next time. True, yeah, because we've got Lucky Day, written by Pete Matigue. I'll be interested to know if that actually ties into the war between the land and sea at all, because Pete Matigue is writing that spin-off.